When was the last time you increased prices for your clients? If the answer is a year or longer, especially if it's like never, this video is for you because we are talking about price increases today. Raising prices is vital to the longevity of your business. Nothing in your world gets cheaper either, and you want to be able to pay your staff more and invest in your business as well. So if you're not raising prices on a regular basis, after a couple of years, you're going to start feeling it on the financial bottom line. My name is Adam Hanneman. Welcome to Ramblings of a Geek. I've been in the MSP space for the better part of a couple of decades, and I've seen lots of different price increases come and go, and I've seen most of them work out just fine. So let's talk about what it means to raise prices and kind of how to do it and why to do it and when to do it and all those kinds of things today. One MSP that I worked with hadn't ever raised prices, and they were worried about losing clients, and rightfully so, right? This is a scary thing if you've never done it before. So over the course of kind of doing a bunch of math and kind of figuring out where things were, the vast majority of their clients had a 15% price increase. And then there was a handful of clients that got much bigger ones, 50%, 100%, couple 100%. And as they rolled it out and they increased prices, they lost a couple of those really big ones, but not all of them, and not even the ones that moved up 300%. It was some of the ones that were kind of in that middle range. And ultimately, it was not really that big of a deal for them. And in fact, after they increased prices, all of their metrics went up because they kind of got back to kind of where they probably should have been. And over the course of the last several years, they've been increasing prices on a regular basis. So as I talk through price increases, I would typically start with the why, but I think the why is pretty apparent in this case, right? If you don't raise prices, you're going to fall behind. So it's time to just raise prices and kind of get your process put together. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about the how, the when, and some of the other nuances that kind of go along with it. All right, so the first question is, how do you raise your rates, right? And the easy answer is don't overcomplicate it, right? You basically pick a day and you pick a rate and you let the client know that we're going to raise your rates. Now, if you're going to raise them a nominal fee, a couple percent, 5% or something like that, you probably just send an email along with an invoice and say on day X, we're going to go ahead and raise your rate Y%, and you just move on, right? Or Y dollars. It sort of depends on how you want to talk about it. Now, if it's a larger increase, larger than 5%, 5 to 15%, somewhere in there, you might want to send a one-off email directly to them and let them know what's going on, and give them an opportunity to really kind of give you some feedback. Anything more than 15%, I might do a meeting with, especially if you've not raised rates in the recent history, because I think it's a good idea to have a conversation about those kinds of things. The last thing you want to do is alienate them just because of how you deliver the message, not that you're raising rates, because it's certainly possible to raise your rates a fairly sizable amount, not have a client terribly irritated unless you messages it poorly, right? So you want to make sure your messaging is clear. When you raise your rates, you might be tempted to explain why, and things like, we've done this service, we've upgraded things, and those kinds of things. I think it's a perfectly normal thing to say that, and I think it's not a bad idea to do it that way either, right? Telling your clients some of the things that you've done, you've improved things, you've leveled up some stuff. Those are things you should take a little bit of a victory lap on. I wouldn't make it be 2 or 3 or 4 pages or something like that, probably just a paragraph or maybe 2, but telling them, hey, we've done some more stuff. We are more capable now than we were before, and some of those things is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. And depending on the size of the increase, you may want to consider phasing in a rate increase over time. I probably don't do that if it's not, more than 30%. If it's a 15% price increase, I'm not going to phase that in. But if it's a 30, 50, 100, 200% price increase, I might phase that in over time, just to kind of give them a little bit of a runway there. That, of course, will be up to you. And I don't think you necessarily need to do it that way, but you certainly could if you feel like that might lessen the blow a little bit. All right, so the next question is, when do you raise your rates? And there's really 2 logical times. One is at the end of a year or at the end of your fiscal year, and the other one is at the end of the client's contract. And really the deciding factor here is going to be what the contract language says. If the contract language says you can raise prices kind of whenever, you can kind of do it whenever. If your contracts are month to month, or you don't have contracts, then you can literally do them whenever you feel like it. But if your contract does kind of paint you into a corner, that's a thing where you're going to want to make sure that you honor the contract, you do things by the contract. And then that might be a situation where you might want to consider upgrading that contract then when it comes time for the next renewal. So if you need help with your contracts, I'll drop a couple links down below for some legal resources I recommend and have some personal knowledge about, and would definitely have you go in that direction, especially if you are wondering about whether or not you can raise those rates based on what your contracts say. So ultimately, if you don't have constraints built into your contracts, raise them when it makes sense for you and when it makes sense for your clients. One caveat that I'll put out there is that if you have clients that have a budget cycle and you know about their budget cycle, work within their budget cycle. Do not raise rates on them willy-nilly just because it felt like it or because it worked for you. You want to work within their budget cycle because you're going to get a lot more respect that way. And it's really entirely possible to lose a big client because you just didn't honor the process and the cycle that you already knew about. So then the big question is, how much can I raise my rates, right? And in a perfect world, when all of your clients are perfectly stack compliant and they don't overuse your services and they're not annoying and they don't like just go crazy with the tickets and those kinds of things, you set a flat rate and you move it up that way and everything just moves up and you move on, right? That would be great, except we don't live in a perfect world, right? So you're going to have clients that fit into probably one of three different categories, right? The overly profitable clients, the average profitable clients, and your problem children. And we're going to talk about all three of those things next. The reality is that most of your clients, probably 80% or so, probably live in that middle tier, and you've got some outliers on top and some outliers on the bottom, and that's why we're going to talk about all three of them. And if you want to see how I calculate agreement profitability and those kinds of things, I actually recorded a video about this. It was all about financial KPIs and those kinds of things. Agreement profitability was part of that, and that's kind of what I'm talking about next. So if you haven't watched that video, it would be a good idea to watch it. I'll throw a link up above, and I'll link in the video description as well. So let's start at the very, very top of the list thing, right? This is your clients that are overly profitable. These are the clients that don't use you very much because they're either fully stack compliant or they're just kind of quiet or they're fairly technically savvy on their own or whatever, right? But these are clients that are heavily profitable. These clients are the ones you want to be mindful about not losing because they feel like they're maybe not getting enough love from you. So this is one of those areas where I would recommend that you're paying attention to them. And this is an opportunity for you to take a little bit of a victory lap with them and say, hey, you know what? We value your partnership so much that this is the time of year we would typically do a price increase. But guess what? You're such an awesome client and we love you so much that we're not going to give you a price increase. That's not a terrible way of doing things. You don't necessarily have to do it that way, but this is an opportunity for you to kind of take a little bit of a kind of almost like free victory lap on that kind of thing. So then let's talk about the middle of the road clients, right? In this middle of the road section, like, is probably the biggest section that you've got. And I'm going to talk about this in relation to how I would price my agreements. And so if you've not watched my agreement pricing video, I'll link that above and also below in the description. But I think about your agreement pricing in sort of two ways, right? The first way is your cloud side of the world, and the other way is your service side of the world. Let's talk about those separately, and then we'll combine them together here. So if you remember my pricing video, I talk about building out your price on the service side as it relates to the average time per endpoint or average time per user, those kinds of things, right? And so what you do is you figure out your average time per endpoint or average time per user per month and multiply that by your hourly rate, and that gets you kind of that service side of the pricing. Well, what I would do in this case is, let's say you're going to raise your prices 5 or 10%, whatever that looks like, and it could be some other percent than that. But if you're going to raise your prices in any which way, shape, or form, you raise your rates, you raise that hourly rate, and you multiply that by your average time per endpoint again, and that gets you your updated service side of the world. And then you take a look at your COGS as it relates to your cloud stuff. That's your EDR and your spam filtering and all those kinds of things that kind of land in that cloud side of the world. And you take that cloud side of the world and you take a look at their new pricing and whatever the increases happen there, because that happens too, right? There's oftentimes they raise their prices as well. So you want to incorporate that into your new pricing, do your markup thing there again. And then you take that new service number and your new cloud number and you add them together and you round it up, round it down, figure out where it makes the most sense. And that becomes your new price. I like doing it that way because it's a very completist way of doing things. The other way of doing it is you could just simply say, this is the middle of the range stuff. It's a 5% straight across the board price increase, 10% or whatever your price is. And you just add that percentage on and that becomes your new price. And you maybe tweak it a little bit if this number doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but like you could do it that way too. I like doing it in a little bit more complicated fashion just because it really sets the bar for pricing new agreements and stuff as well, right? You want to make sure that as you adjust pricing for your existing clients, that you're also pricing things for your new clients as well, and make sure that you incorporating those new pricing arrangement in that side of the world as well. All right, so then let's talk about your problem children, right? Your problem children are your clients that are just not profitable at all. They use your services too much. They're too noisy. They're not stat compliant. Those kinds of problem children typically have lower agreement profitability than others. And the first thing is you need to understand how far below the line they are. If they're just a little bit below the line, maybe instead of giving, let's say your average price increase is like 7%, you give them a 15% and you move on. It's not that big of a deal. But if they're way behind, or if they are just super noisy, super not stat compliant, this is an opportunity for you to really raise their prices by quite a bit and make it so that way they become more profitable for you because you don't run a charity. In some cases, this may have you generate what I affectionately call the FU price. This FU price really is here to get these clients to pick one of two paths. One, allow you to be profitable, right? By charging them a couple 100% more for the ones that they were paying from before. That makes them more profitable, makes worth doing business with. Or two, they leave. And when they leave, they take all of that time and energy and effort that you have to put in to maintain an unprofitable client away, and you can go spend that on a client that's a better fit, which in both cases you win, because you either become more profitable or you lose a client that isn't profitable enough and you move on from that. Here's the funny part, is I've seen a number of clients take that FU price and go, we're good because we know that we're going to have a pain in the butt to deal with, and we understand it, and we're going to move on. We're all good to go, and you have actually almost a healthier relationship after that. So I wouldn't be terribly surprised if a client takes that pricing and just moves on, right? And they could become a better client for it. The biggest fear with all of this price increase stuff is, am I going to lose clients, right? Am I going to hemorrhage a bunch of clients and be worse off for it? And I found a couple things to be true. Number one, if you raise prices about once a year at a modest rate, most clients aren't going to leave. Number two, if you're providing good service at a fair rate, even a larger than average price increase will likely have clients sticking around anyway. Because again, if that service is good and you are doing a good job for them, changing MSPs is a pain in the butt. And if you're doing a good job for them, they will value that good relationship and that good work that you do for them. Now, on the other hand, if you aren't doing a very good job for them and you raise their prices, especially a bunch, expect them to walk away. So a large part of this is understanding how good or not good you are as an MSP and how good of service you're providing to your clients. And one thing I haven't mentioned at all, because I've talked a large part about this as it relates to your agreement pricing and those kinds of things, is don't neglect raising your time and materials and your ad hoc pricing, as well as your project pricing. This is a good opportunity for you to do those kinds of things. And for the most part, all you do at that point is you raise them internally, and then as you quote new pricing or you quote new projects for clients, you just give them the new pricing and you just move on. Usually not that big of a deal. If you've been watching my channel for any length of time, you know I talk a lot about finance. I'm actually going to link to a playlist as it relates to all of my different finance videos because I think that might be helpful for you. And with all of that, thanks for coming on this ramble with me. I hope to see you in the next one.